The autumn winds howled through the pine forests of the northern mountains, carrying with them the scent of snow and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Tormund Frostbeard pulled his thick woolen cloak tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse along the narrow mountain path. The seasoned warrior had been traveling for 3 days, seeking shelter before the first heavy snowfall would make the treacherous passes impassable. At 35 winters old, Tormund had seen more battles than most men twice his age. His weathered face bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his steel-grey eyes held the wisdom of someone who had learned to survive in a world where weakness meant certain doom. The silver coins in his leather pouch jingled softly with each step his horse took, payment from his latest contract as a mercenary guard for a merchant caravan. As the path wound higher into the mountains, Tormund's breath formed small clouds in the increasingly frigid air. His horse, a sturdy mare named Griselda, snorted and shook her mane, sensing her rider's urgency to find shelter. The sky above had turned an ominous shade of grey, and Tormund knew from experience that such clouds meant snow would begin falling within hours. It was then that he saw it. A small wooden structure nestled between 2 towering pines, partially hidden by overgrown brush and fallen branches. The cabin appeared weathered but sturdy, its wooden walls darkened with age, and its roof covered with a thick layer of moss. Smoke should have been rising from its chimney, but the structure seemed completely abandoned. Tormund dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously. Years of warfare had taught him never to assume anything was as it appeared. He walked around the perimeter, noting the thick wooden shutters that covered the windows and the heavy oak door that hung slightly ajar. The building showed signs of long abandonment. Weeds grew tall around its foundation, and spiderwebs stretched across the corners of the entrance. As he examined the structure more closely, he noticed something peculiar carved into a wooden post near the door. Nordic runes spelled out a simple message: "For sale, 2 silver coins." Below the runes, a small wooden box was nailed to the post, clearly intended for payment. Tormund stroked his thick beard thoughtfully. 2 silver coins was an incredibly modest price for any dwelling, even one in such a remote location. Most cabins in these mountains, if they could be found at all, would cost at least 10 silver coins, sometimes more. The price seemed almost too good to be true, but the approaching storm left him little choice. He reached into his pouch and counted out exactly 2 silver coins, their surfaces worn smooth from countless transactions. The coins clinked softly as he dropped them into the wooden payment box. According to Nordic custom, the transaction was now complete. The cabin belonged to him. Tormund pushed open the heavy oak door, which creaked loudly on its iron hinges. The sound echoed through the forest, causing a few birds to take flight from nearby branches. He stepped carefully across the threshold, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the pommel of his sword. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well maintained, despite its abandoned appearance from outside. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with neat stacks of seasoned firewood arranged beside it. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding various pottery vessels and what appeared to be preserved foods. A sturdy wooden table occupied the center of the main room, surrounded by 3 hand-carved chairs. The cabin consisted of 2 rooms, the main living area and a smaller chamber that likely served as sleeping quarters. Thick woolen tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of forest animals and mountain landscapes. The floor was covered with well-woven rugs that showed signs of quality craftsmanship. Tormund moved through the main room, examining everything carefully. The preserved foods on the shelves appeared recently stored, and the firewood was dry and ready to burn. Everything suggested that someone had prepared the cabin for winter habitation, yet there were no signs of recent human presence. As he explored further, Tormund discovered additional amenities that made the cabin even more valuable than its modest price suggested. A small storage room contained barrels of fresh water, sacks of grain, and various tools necessary for mountain survival. The level of preparation was remarkable. Whoever had stocked this cabin had done so with great care and attention to detail. The approaching storm made itself known through increasingly strong wind gusts that rattled the cabin's shutters. Tormund realized he had made his decision just in time. He led Griselda to a small lean-to structure behind the cabin that provided adequate shelter for his horse. The mare seemed content to be out of the wind, and Tormund ensured she had access to the hay he found stored in the lean-to. Returning to the cabin, Tormund began the process of making it habitable for the night. He opened the shutters to allow natural light into the space, then set about building a fire in the stone fireplace. The chimney drew well, and soon a warm, crackling fire filled the main room with dancing light and comforting heat. As the day progressed into evening, the first snowflakes began to fall outside. Tormund watched through the window as the forest slowly transformed into a winter wonderland. The timing of his cabin purchase had been perfect. Within another hour, the mountain paths would become treacherous, if not completely impassable. He prepared a simple meal from some of his travel provisions, supplemented by preserved meats he found among the cabin's supplies. The food was excellent quality, further confirming that whoever had stocked this place had spared no expense in ensuring its occupant would be comfortable. As night fell completely, Tormund began to feel the exhaustion of his long journey. The warmth from the fireplace and the security of solid walls around him created a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in weeks. He decided to explore the sleeping chamber to prepare for a well-deserved rest. The sleeping chamber was smaller than the main room, but equally well-appointed. A large wooden bed dominated the space, covered with thick furs and woolen blankets that promised warmth through even the coldest mountain nights. A small wooden chest sat at the foot of the bed, and a single window looked out toward the forest. Tormund approached the bed, intending to test its comfort before settling in for the night. But as he drew closer, he stopped abruptly, his warrior's instincts immediately alerting him that something was wrong. The blankets weren't lying flat as they should be on an empty bed. There was clearly something underneath them. His hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt as he crept closer. The shape beneath the covers was unmistakably human, and from the gentle rise and fall of the blankets, whoever was there was breathing steadily in deep sleep. Tormund's mind raced through possibilities. Had he stumbled upon a trap? Was this some kind of ambush? Carefully, silently, he reached out and gently pulled back a corner of the top blanket. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat and sent a chill through his entire body that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. Lying peacefully in the bed, her long golden hair spread across the pillow like spun sunlight, was a woman unlike any he had ever seen. Even in sleep, her features held a regal quality that spoke of noble birth and high station. Her skin was pale as fresh snow, and her breathing was so gentle it barely disturbed the air around her. But what truly made Tormund's blood freeze was the recognition that slowly dawned on him. This was no ordinary woman seeking shelter from the storm. The golden circlet barely visible beneath her hair, the quality of her sleeping robes, and most tellingly, the distinctive silver pendant around her neck, all of these details pointed to an identity that filled him with equal parts terror and disbelief. This was Queen Valdina the Wise, sovereign ruler of the Southern Kingdom and the most feared military strategist in all the Northern lands. For the past 3 years, her armies and those of the Northern Alliance had been locked in a brutal conflict that had devastated entire regions. She was considered the enemy of every warrior who fought for the Northern clans, including Tormund himself. And now, inexplicably, she lay sleeping peacefully in the bed of the cabin he had just purchased for 2 silver coins. Tormund stood frozen beside the bed, his mind struggling to process the impossible situation before him. Queen Valdina, the woman whose military genius had cost the Northern Alliance countless battles, lay vulnerable and defenseless, mere inches from his blade. The irony was overwhelming. After years of warfare, the fate of kingdoms could be decided in this remote mountain cabin with a simple stroke of his sword. His warrior's training screamed at him to act. This was the enemy commander whose strategies had outmaneuvered northern forces repeatedly, whose very name struck fear into the hearts of Alliance soldiers. By all military logic, he should end her life immediately and claim the victory that had eluded northern armies for years. Yet something held him back. Perhaps it was the complete peacefulness of her expression, or the way the firelight from the main room cast gentle shadows across her sleeping face. She appeared utterly exhausted, as if she had reached the very limits of her endurance before finally finding this place of rest. Tormund examined her more closely, noting details that spoke to recent hardship. Her usually immaculate royal appearance showed signs of difficult travel. Her golden hair, though still beautiful, was slightly disheveled, and her sleeping robes, while of fine quality, bore the dust of long roads. Dark circles under her eyes suggested many sleepless nights, and her hands, visible above the blankets, showed small scratches and calluses that spoke of recent manual labor or difficult conditions. The more he observed, the more questions arose in his mind. What was the Southern Queen doing alone in this remote mountain cabin? Where were her guards, her retinue, her army? How had she come to be here, sleeping so deeply that his entrance hadn't awakened her? As if sensing his presence, Queen Valdina stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring words too soft for him to understand. The sound of her voice, even in sleep, carried the same authority and intelligence that had made her legendary among both allies and enemies. Yet there was also something else in her tone, a weariness that suggested the weight of leadership had taken its toll. Tormund stepped back from the bed, his hand still resting on his sword hilt. The ethical implications of his situation began to dawn on him. While military law might justify eliminating an enemy commander, his personal code of honor presented complications. She was alone, defenseless, and clearly seeking nothing more than rest. To strike down a sleeping opponent, regardless of their identity, went against everything his father had taught him about honorable combat. The storm outside intensified, with wind now howling around the cabin's walls and snow beginning to accumulate against the windows. The weather reinforced the isolation of their situation. Even if he made a different choice, traveling anywhere in these conditions would be impossible until the storm passed. Tormund made his decision. He would wait for her to awaken naturally, then confront her with questions about how she came to be here. If she posed a threat, he would respond accordingly, but he would not harm a sleeping opponent, regardless of political circumstances. He retreated to the main room, carefully closing the door to the sleeping chamber behind him. The fire had burned down somewhat, so he added fresh logs and stirred the coals back to full flame. The warmth and light helped clear his thoughts as he considered the unprecedented situation he faced. Settling into one of the wooden chairs near the fire, Tormund tried to piece together the puzzle. Queen Valdina's presence in this remote location suggested she was either fleeing from something or someone, or she was engaged in some covert mission that required her to travel without her usual royal protection. Either possibility had significant implications for the ongoing conflict between their peoples. Hours passed as Tormund maintained his vigil by the fire. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and the snow continued to pile higher against the cabin's walls. The isolation was complete. Whatever transpired in this cabin would remain between him and the sleeping queen until the weather cleared. As dawn approached, the first grey light filtering through the storm clouds, Tormund heard stirring from the sleeping chamber. Queen Valdina was beginning to awaken. He positioned himself near the fireplace, ensuring he had clear sightlines to the chamber door while maintaining a non-threatening but ready stance. The sounds from the sleeping chamber grew more distinct. The rustle of blankets, soft footsteps on wooden floors, and then silence. Tormund imagined she was likely taking stock of her surroundings, perhaps noticing changes that indicated someone else was present in the cabin. When the door to the sleeping chamber finally opened, Queen Valdina appeared in the doorway with a composure that was remarkable given the circumstances. Despite having just awakened, she maintained the regal bearing that had made her famous throughout the northern lands. Her golden hair was now neatly arranged, and her clothes, while travel-worn, were properly adjusted. Her eyes, a striking shade of blue that seemed to hold depths of both wisdom and sadness, met Tormund's gaze directly. There was no surprise in her expression, no fear or alarm at finding a stranger in what should have been her private refuge. Instead, she regarded him with the same calm assessment she might give to any situation requiring her attention. "I wondered when you would arrive," she said, her voice carrying the clear, authoritative tone that had commanded armies. "Though I admit I expected you somewhat sooner." Tormund was momentarily taken aback by her apparent lack of surprise at his presence. "You were expecting me." Queen Valdina moved gracefully into the main room, approaching the fireplace with the confidence of someone completely at ease in the environment. "Not you specifically, but someone. I placed very specific conditions on the sale of this cabin, conditions designed to attract a particular type of person." "The sale?" Tormund's confusion deepened. "You mean the 2 silver coins?" "Indeed." She settled into the chair across from him with the same natural authority she had always displayed on her throne. "Tell me, warrior of the North, what drove you to purchase an abandoned cabin for such a modest sum? What circumstances brought you to this remote mountain location during the approach of winter's first storm?" Tormund studied her face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. "I needed shelter from the storm. The price seemed unusually reasonable." "Reasonable, yes, but also selective." Queen Valdina leaned forward slightly, her intelligent eyes never leaving his face. A merchant would have questioned such a low price, suspecting some hidden defect or problem. A wealthy noble would have found the location too remote and primitive for their tastes. A common traveler would likely lack even 2 silver coins to spare. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "But a seasoned warrior, traveling alone through dangerous territory, carrying modest wealth earned through honest service, such a person would recognize the value of immediate shelter and would have the courage to investigate an unusual opportunity." Tormund felt a growing unease as he realized the implications of her words. "You planned this. The cabin, the price, my finding you here. None of this is coincidence." "Very perceptive." Queen Valdina's expression softened slightly, revealing glimpses of the exhaustion he had noticed while she slept. "Though I must admit, the specific identity of who would respond to my invitation remained unknown to me until this moment." "Why?" The question came out more harshly than Tormund intended. "What possible reason could you have for arranging such an elaborate scenario?" For the first time since awakening, Queen Valdina's composed facade showed signs of cracking. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weariness that spoke of burdens too heavy for any one person to bear. "Because I am tired, Tormund Frostbeard. Tired of war, tired of making decisions that send thousands to their graves, tired of being the strategic mind behind a conflict that has consumed everything I once held dear." Tormund started at hearing his name spoken aloud. "How do you know who you are?" She managed a small, sad smile. "Your reputation precedes you, even in southern lands. The mercenary warrior who has never broken a contract, never abandoned a client, never retreated from a fight he believed was just. Your honor is spoken of even among your enemies." The revelation that his reputation had reached even enemy royalty was both flattering and disturbing. "That still doesn't explain why you arranged for me to find you here." Queen Valdina rose from her chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the swirling snow. 3 years of warfare have taught me that military victories solve nothing if they come at the cost of everything worth protecting. My kingdom bleeds from endless conflict, as does yours. The people of both lands suffer while their leaders pursue glory and conquest." She turned back to face him, and Tormund saw something in her eyes that he hadn't expected: hope. "I have discovered something during my travels through these mountains. Something that could change the course of this war entirely. But the knowledge I possess is too dangerous for me to carry alone, and too important to entrust to conventional diplomatic channels." "What kind of discovery?" Hidden in these mountains, carefully concealed from both armies, is a force that could tip the balance of power decisively in favor of whichever side controls it. An army, Tormund. Not of soldiers, but of resources. Weapons, supplies, and strategic positions that could end this conflict within months. Tormund felt his warrior's instincts sharpen. And you're telling me this? Because I need a guardian. Someone with the skill to protect this secret, the honor to use it wisely, and the independence to make decisions based on what is right rather than what serves political interests. The implications of her proposal began to dawn on him. You're asking me to become the keeper of military secrets that could determine the fate of kingdoms. I'm asking you to help me find a path to peace that doesn't require the complete destruction of either side. Queen Valdina returned to her chair, leaning forward with an intensity that made her words compelling, despite their revolutionary nature. This war has already cost too much. If we can find a way to end it that preserves both our peoples, isn't that worth considering? The storm outside seemed to mirror the turbulence in Tormund's mind. Everything he thought he knew about this conflict, about his enemies, about the nature of the war itself was being challenged by this extraordinary conversation. Why should I trust you? For all I know, this is an elaborate trap designed to turn me against my own people. Queen Valdina nodded as if she had expected this question. Because, Tormund Frostbeard, if I wanted you captured or eliminated, there are far simpler ways to accomplish that than luring you to a remote mountain cabin and engaging you in philosophical discussions about the nature of warfare. Her logic was sound, but Tormund still struggled with the magnitude of what she was proposing. Even if I believe your motives are genuine, what makes you think I'm the right person for this responsibility? Your reputation speaks for itself, but more than that, she gestured toward the sleeping chamber. You found me defenseless and vulnerable, your most feared enemy completely at your mercy, yet you chose to wait, to listen, to consider alternatives to violence. That choice tells me more about your character than a dozen letters of recommendation. The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket. Tormund realized that his decision in those first moments upon finding her sleeping had indeed revealed something fundamental about his own values and priorities. Tell me about this hidden army, he said finally. Queen Valdina's expression brightened with what might have been relief. It's not an army of people, but an army of possibilities. Hidden supply caches, established in secret over the past year by both sides as emergency reserves. Weapons stockpiles, medical supplies, food stores, all carefully concealed throughout these mountains. Both sides have been preparing for extended siege warfare? Exactly. But here's what neither side realizes. Many of these cache locations overlap or are positioned so close to each other that a coordinated effort could secure the majority of them simultaneously. Whoever controls these supplies could dictate the terms of peace, simply by controlling the resources necessary for continued war. Tormund began to understand the strategic brilliance of what she was describing. Rather than fighting battles to defeat armies, you could end the war by controlling the supplies that make warfare possible. Precisely. No dramatic battles, no heroic last stands, no glorious victories built on mountains of corpses. Simply the practical reality that armies without supplies cannot continue fighting. The elegance of the strategy impressed Tormund despite his lingering suspicions. And you've mapped all these cache locations? Not all, but enough to make the difference. The information is hidden here, in this cabin, secured in ways that require both knowledge and physical presence to access. Queen Valdina rose and moved to the wooden chest in the sleeping chamber, returning with what appeared to be an ordinary piece of firewood. However, upon closer examination, Tormund could see that it had been carefully hollowed out and sealed. The complete cache maps, supply inventories, and access instructions are hidden within items throughout this cabin. No single piece contains enough information to be useful alone, but together they provide everything necessary to control the outcome of this war. And you're willing to share this information with me? I'm willing to entrust it to someone who has proven they can make difficult moral choices under pressure. She met his gaze steadily. The question is whether you're willing to accept the responsibility of deciding how this knowledge should be used. Tormund stared into the fire, watching the flames dance across the logs as he considered the magnitude of the choice before him. Everything he had believed about this war, about the nature of conflict itself, was being challenged by this remarkable woman who had orchestrated their meeting with the precision of a master strategist. Outside, the storm was beginning to show signs of weakening, though snow continued to fall steadily. Soon, the world beyond this cabin would become accessible again, and decisions made here would have consequences that rippled across kingdoms. If I agree to this, Tormund said slowly, what exactly are you proposing we do with this information? We use it to force both sides to the negotiating table, not through threats or ultimatums, but by demonstrating that continued warfare serves no one's interests when the resources necessary for fighting are under neutral control. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking, but Tormund could see the logic underlying it. You're talking about ending a war through resource management rather than military victory. I'm talking about ending a war by making peace more practical than continued fighting. Queen Valdina's voice carried a conviction that made her words compelling. Both sides have invested too much pride and too many lives to simply agree to stop fighting. But if the practical realities of warfare change, leaders can accept peace while claiming they're responding to new strategic circumstances rather than admitting defeat. And you believe this could actually work. I believe it's the only approach that offers hope of peace without requiring the complete destruction of either side. She leaned back in her chair, studying his face carefully. But it requires someone with the skills and independence to manage these resources fairly, someone both sides could potentially trust, despite their allegiances. Someone like a mercenary warrior with a reputation for honor. Someone exactly like that. Tormund felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a heavy cloak. The choice before him was no longer simply about personal survival or even military loyalty. It was about the kind of future that would emerge from this devastating conflict. As the first hints of dawn began to brighten the storm clouds outside, Queen Valdina spoke again, her voice soft but clear. I should tell you, Tormund, that accepting this responsibility means you can never return to your old life. The knowledge you would carry, the choices you would need to make, they would change you permanently. There would be no going back to simple mercenary contracts and straightforward military objectives. And if I refuse, then I will respect your choice, and we will part ways when the storm clears. The cabin is yours regardless. You paid for it fairly, and the transaction stands. But the secrets it contains will remain hidden, and this war will continue until one side achieves total victory or both sides exhaust themselves completely. The honesty of her answer impressed him. She was offering him a choice without coercion, presenting the full consequences of either decision. How do I know you won't simply use this information to gain advantage for your own side once you have my protection? Queen Valdina smiled, and for the first time since awakening, the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than diplomatically calculated. Because, my dear guardian, I won't be using this information at all. If you accept this responsibility, the knowledge and all decisions about how to use it become yours alone. I will provide guidance and consultation if you request it, but the ultimate choices will be yours to make. You're giving up control of your own strategic advantage. I'm entrusting it to someone whose judgment I've come to respect, even in the brief time we've known each other. Her expression grew serious again. The burden of leadership has taught me that sometimes the wisest choice is knowing when to delegate authority to someone better suited for a particular task. Ooh, the storm outside had definitely begun to weaken, with the wind no longer howling around the cabin's walls and the snow falling more gently. Soon, the immediate isolation that had allowed for this extraordinary conversation would end, and the outside world would intrude upon their mountain sanctuary. I need to understand exactly what you're proposing, Tormund said. You want me to become the keeper of information that could end this war with full authority to decide how and when to use it. I want you to become something new, a guardian of peace rather than a warrior for any particular side, someone who can use military knowledge and strategic thinking to create opportunities for resolution rather than escalation. The concept was revolutionary, challenging everything Tormund had learned about warfare and loyalty. Yet the more he considered it, the more appealing it became. How many battles had he fought that resolved nothing? How many victories had simply led to the next conflict? And you would support whatever decisions I make, even if they conflict with your kingdom's immediate interests? I would support decisions made in good faith, with the goal of ending this war justly. That might sometimes conflict with short-term political interests, but it serves the greater good of both our peoples. Tormund rose from his chair and moved to the window, looking out at the forest, now blanketed in fresh snow. The world looked peaceful and pristine, unmarked by the violence and suffering that had consumed so much of the surrounding lands. Perhaps it was possible to work toward making that peace more than just a temporary illusion. When he turned back to face Queen Valdina, his decision was made. I accept the responsibility you're offering, but with conditions of my own. Name them. First, I want complete honesty between us. No diplomatic evasions, no political maneuvering, no hidden agendas. If we're going to work together toward peace, it has to be based on trust. Agreed. Second, I retain the right to make decisions that might not serve either side's military interests if I believe they serve the cause of peace. You've offered me authority over this information. I want assurance that you won't attempt to influence my choices through manipulation or pressure. Also agreed. And third, if this plan fails, if my efforts to use this information for peace prove unsuccessful, I want your word that you'll support a fair division of the cache contents between both sides, rather than allowing either army to gain total advantage. Queen Valdina considered this final condition carefully before nodding. That seems wise, a safeguard against the possibility that peace proves unattainable. Then we have an agreement. She rose from her chair and extended her hand in the manner of sealing a formal compact. When Tormund clasped it, her grip was firm and steady, the handshake of someone accustomed to making binding agreements. "Welcome to your new role, Guardian of the Mountain Caches," she said with a slight smile. "I hope you find it more fulfilling than traditional warfare." And as they released hands, the morning sun finally broke through the storm clouds, sending streams of golden light through the cabin's windows. The timing seemed symbolic. A new day dawning on possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours before. 6 months later, the war that had devastated the northern lands for 3 years came to an end, not with a climactic battle, but with a negotiated settlement brokered by an unlikely mediator, a former mercenary warrior who controlled the supply lines that both armies needed to continue fighting. And Tormund Frostbeard had used his position as guardian of the mountain caches to gradually demonstrate to both sides that continued warfare was impractical when their essential supplies were under neutral control. Rather than cutting off resources entirely, he had implemented a system of gradual reduction that made the cost of continued fighting increasingly prohibitive while providing incentives for negotiation. The final peace treaty was signed in the very cabin where the unlikely alliance between former enemies had begun. Queen Valdina represented the southern kingdom, while the northern alliance sent their most respected diplomats. Tormund, no longer a warrior for any particular side, served as the neutral mediator who ensured both parties honored their commitments. The mountain cabin became a permanent neutral meeting ground, maintained by representatives from both kingdoms as a symbol of the peace they had achieved through cooperation rather than conquest. Tormund remained as its guardian, ensuring that the lessons learned during those crucial winter days were not forgotten as political circumstances changed. Years later, when historians wrote about the end of the Great Northern War, they would struggle to explain how such a devastating conflict had been resolved through negotiation rather than military victory. The full story of the mountain cabin, the hidden caches, and the extraordinary meeting between a mercenary warrior and an enemy queen would remain a carefully guarded secret, known only to those who had lived it. But in the northern lands, peace held firm, and children grew up hearing stories not of glorious battles and heroic last stands, but of the wisdom that could emerge when former enemies chose understanding over destruction and cooperation over conquest. The cabin still stands today, a testament to the power of unexpected choices and the possibility that even the most entrenched conflicts can find resolution when approached with courage, honor, and the willingness to see beyond traditional boundaries. In the end, Queen Valdina had been right. Sometimes the wisest choice is knowing when to entrust important decisions to someone better suited for the task. And sometimes the greatest victories are won not through warfare, but through the much harder work of building lasting peace. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Nordic history and mythology. If you enjoyed this tale of honor, wisdom, and unexpected alliances, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more amazing Viking stories, and let us know in the comments what part of this story resonated most with you. Until next time, may your own choices be guided by wisdom and courage.